It was just another typical day, or so they thought. A group of rough-looking bikers, with their roaring engines and tough exteriors, rolled into a quiet parking lot. They spotted her, a woman standing alone by her car. It wasn't long before they decided to have some fun and test if she could handle their intimidation tactics. They revved their engines, got in her space, and started making loud comments, expecting her to shrink away. But what they didn't know was that she wasn't the kind of woman who'd back down. What happened next left them absolutely speechless. In the blink of an eye, her response flipped the situation entirely. This wasn't the moment they'd imagined. Stay tuned to see what went down and how she turned the tables, showing them all exactly who was in charge. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. The bikers, clad in leather jackets and sporting tattoos that seemed to tell a story of their own, had always been used to getting their way. They were the kind of guys who could walk into any room or parking lot and make people nervous. But today, they'd met someone who wasn't fazed. The woman standing at the corner of the lot appeared calm, but something about her presence hinted at a quiet strength. She wasn't the kind of person to engage in conflict unless absolutely necessary. Her face, though soft, held a certain intensity in her eyes that made you wonder if there was more to her than met the eye. As the bikers closed in, their leader, a tall man with a gruff voice, sneered and made a snide remark. He was ready for her to retreat or crumble under their pressure. What he didn't know was that this woman had already faced her own battles, and she wasn't about to let a few loudmouths scare her. The tension in the air was thick as the bikers circled her, their engines purring like predators closing in on prey. The leader, Mike, was getting a little too comfortable, his grin widening as he stepped closer, his boots scraping against the concrete. "What's the matter, sweetheart? Scared?" he taunted, his voice dripping with mockery. His crew watched, their expressions a mix of amusement and impatience. They were used to this, women or anyone really, backing down at the first sign of intimidation. But the woman, who hadn't flinched once, slowly turned her head toward Mike. Her eyes locked on his, and for a brief moment, it felt as though time stopped. She wasn't scared. She wasn't angry. She was calculating, and that unnerved him. She stepped back, her hand sliding into her pocket, and Mike's grin faltered when he saw a small gleam of something, an unexpected flash of confidence. Behind her calm demeanor, there was a story they hadn't accounted for, a past that had shaped her, sharpened her resolve. The bikers didn't know it, but this wasn't her first encounter with people who thought they could push her around. They didn't know what she was capable of, or the secrets she was holding close to her chest. Mike's laughter died down as he caught her gaze. It was clear he was starting to wonder if this would be the easy win he had expected. And then, without warning, the woman reached into her bag, her fingers brushing something hidden inside. The sound of a small metallic object being clicked into place echoed through the lot, sending a ripple of tension through the group. Mike's eyes widened, but he quickly masked his surprise with a forced chuckle. "You don't scare me, lady. I've seen it all." But the woman's quiet smile told a different story. The stakes had just been raised. The air around them seemed to grow colder as the woman stood firm, her hand still hidden in her bag, the tension in her fingers palpable. Mike took a step back, suddenly unsure of himself, though he tried to hide it behind his bravado. "What's your game, huh?" he sneered, his voice wavering ever so slightly. The others, sensing the change, exchanged nervous glances. They weren't used to this kind of energy. Normally, their intimidation worked like a charm, but now something felt different. The woman didn't answer. She just stood there, her eyes scanning the group, calculating. Her stillness only added to the mounting unease. The sound of a car alarm going off in the distance seemed to heighten the silence between them, as though the world was holding its breath. A few feet away, one of the bikers, a younger guy with a wild look in his eyes, took a step forward. "You really think you can take us all on by yourself?" He spat, his fingers twitching near the pocket of his jacket, where a knife might be. He wasn't the only one looking at her like she was a threat now. The others were shifting uncomfortably, unsure if they should advance or back away. Without warning, she moved. Quick, smooth, like she had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. Her hand came out of the bag, revealing a small metallic object. Mike's heart skipped a beat as he caught sight of it. Was it a weapon? But it wasn't the type of weapon he had expected. The woman's face remained calm, her movements deliberate. The rest of the bikers, now on edge, watched her every motion. Mike's hand hovered over his own belt as he debated whether to draw his gun. But before he could make the decision, she spoke, her voice steady but cold. "You think this is over just because you're big and loud." The words hit harder than any punch. It wasn't about intimidation. It was about respect, something they had clearly underestimated. And just as Mike opened his mouth to reply, a shrill sound cut through the air, like a snap of a whip. The woman's object clicked open, revealing exactly what they feared, and they weren't prepared for it. Her next move would change everything. Just as the metallic object snapped open, revealing what looked like a small high-tech device, the bikers froze. It wasn't a weapon, at least not in the way they expected. The woman held it in her hand like it was just another tool. But then, in a swift motion, she pressed a button, and the parking lot was flooded with a series of flashing lights. It was a signal, a silent alarm, one that made every biker tense up, suddenly aware they were not the only ones watching. Mike's eyes widened, realizing the situation had just taken a dangerous turn. He glanced nervously at his crew, but no one was making a move. Something was off. The woman's quiet smile widened, and just as Mike opened his mouth to shout an order, a low hum began to sound from a hidden corner of the lot. The sound grew louder, vibrating through the pavement beneath their feet. The bikers tensed, and their grit on their bikes tightened, preparing for something they couldn't quite predict. Then, without warning, the roar of engines filled the air, but not from the bikers. A convoy of sleek, black motorcycles emerged from around the corner, their riders cloaked in similar dark gear, faces hidden behind helmets. They moved in perfect unison, pulling into the lot with precision. The bikers were now surrounded, and the woman, standing in the center, hadn't moved an inch. She looked completely unfazed, as if she had expected this moment all along. Mike's heart sank. This wasn't a fight they were going to win. He had underestimated her completely. The woman wasn't just someone out for a quiet day. She had set them up, and now it was clear that the tables had turned in a way none of them could have anticipated. Her calm, controlled demeanor stood in stark contrast to the chaos unfolding. As the new riders parked their bikes, the woman took a slow, deliberate step toward Mike. "You should have left me alone," she said softly, her voice carrying across the lot. "You didn't know who you were dealing with." Mike looked around at his crew, the confidence draining from his face. His own men were now looking to him for guidance, but he had no answers. The situation had escalated beyond anything he could control. The woman had played them, and they had fallen right into her trap. And just when Mike thought things couldn't get worse, a voice crackled through his earpiece, sending a chill down his spine. "You've got 5 seconds to leave, or things will get real ugly." The calm tone of the voice on the other end sent a shiver through him. This wasn't a threat. It was a warning. The clock was ticking. Mike's hands tightened around his bike handles, but his body froze. The seconds dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. The convoy of black motorcycles stood like an impenetrable wall, their riders silent and unyielding. The woman's words echoed in Mike's mind, her calm, confident tone cutting through his panic. "You should have left me alone." He glanced at his crew, who were now visibly shaken. That Mike was speechless, his mind raced, trying to piece it together. But before he could say anything, the woman turned to the riders who had surrounded them, giving them a subtle nod. They immediately moved back, allowing her brother to approach, standing beside her like they were in perfect sync. Mike swallowed hard. It wasn't just about intimidating some strangers. They were orchestrating something bigger. This was a message. The woman finally stepped toward Mike, closing the gap between them. "You had your chance," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "This isn't a fight you're going to win. Not today, not ever." And then, just as Mike opened his mouth to respond, another sound pierced the air. This time, the unmistakable hum of police sirens in the distance. The woman's smile deepened. "I'm not here to fight," she said, "but I am here to win." In the distance, a police car pulled up, followed by two more. It seemed the woman had everything planned, down to the very last detail. The bikers' faces drained of color as they realized they had been caught, and no one was going anywhere. Mike turned to leave, but the woman's brother stepped forward, blocking his path with ease. The sound of approaching footsteps from behind made it clear this wasn't over yet. And in that moment, Mike understood the full weight of his mistake.